It's time for Pure Performance.
Get your stopwatches ready. It's time for Pure Performance with Andy Grabner and Brian Wilson. Hello and welcome to another episode of Pure Performance. My name is Brian Wilson, and as always, my co-host Andy Grabner is with me. Andy, how are you doing today?
I'm pretty good. I wonder what else I learned from you today, because before we got the recording, you excited me with your language skills. You speak a lot of different languages.
I can say no in a lot of languages.
Yes, yeah. Except?
Well, I don't know it in any of the Asian languages.
Yeah.
I know, well, you're challenging me on German, but I can say it. I can say nein.
You know?
Okay. Yeah. But, no is no in quite a lot of languages. So it's a great way to show that you know a lot of languages is if you want to impress people and win friends. You can say, I can say no in Spanish. But usually when you say it in Spanish, it's a little bit more of a no. A little bit more.
I guess if I ask my wife, it depends on where you're from. Like in Colombia, it might be slightly different pronounced than in Spain or in other countries.
Yeah.
But you know what? I'm really glad that our guest
Very on
today.
topic, yeah,
exactly. Perfect on topic. I'm really glad that our guest today neither said no nor nein when we asked her to get on the show.
Andy is the master of segues, everybody.
Yeah.
And I don't mean the little stupid driving machines.
Yeah, and this is why I want to pass it over to Nana to introduce herself, because Nana, it's an honor to have you on the show, and thanks for not saying no to us, because I know you're busy. Welcome to the show.
Welcome.
Thank you. I'm great. I'm glad to be here on the show, and I can actually teach you two more languages to say no in, which are two of my mother languages, which you probably don't know. Georgian and Migralian, that would be.
Cool.
Migralian? What is Migralian?
Migralian is like a really small tribal language. It's very close to Old Greek. Like we have some words from those, and Georgian is like more like Middle Asian language. Like very like from the sound, it sounds very similar to like Arabic or Hebrew. So yeah.
So then come on, tell us now.
Should I say no in those?
Yes.
So in Georgian it will be ara.
Ara. Okay.
And in Migralian, it will be var.
Interesting.
There's no resemblance at all to no.
No. But we have actually one weird thing, which is we have the in Georgian, we have mom and dad reverse. So you say, so mama means actually father in Georgian, and then deda or daddy actually means mother, which I would really wonder, what is the reason behind it?
Yeah.
Because we copied it and we got it wrong, or the other way.
We just want to be different because everybody can be the same. Yeah.
It was a disgruntled teenager who was like, I'm not going to do it the way everyone else does it. I'm going to do it my way.
Exactly. And talking about this, another great segue. Nana, you've definitely been doing it your way in the last year because it was a great segue again, Brian. Thanks for that.
Yes.
Nana, maybe for those people that don't know you, but I think a lot of people that are listening to us now know you, because I think we name dropped you in the last couple of episodes. We had one with Christian Heckelman where he talked about things not to do when you start with Kubernetes. We highlighted your YouTube channel, TechWorld with Nana. I think it's the link that I've shared the most in the last couple of months since I found out about you.
Yeah.
And it's just phenomenal content. Thank you so much for this stuff. It's amazing what you put out there.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Yeah.
At the when we started actually using this Kubernetes video, so it was me and my friend of mine. I actually had all this Kubernetes knowledge actually that I painfully acquired through setting up the Kubernetes project in one of the Austrian companies. And while I was learning, one thing that I realized was there were just no resources online, at least back then. There were no documentation, a proper documentation. There were no forums where like I would ask a question or I would see a question, the same question that I had a problem with, which had answers to them. So there was like a sign for me, there must be other people struggling with this thing. So I kind of like put together all my notes while I was learning, like, configuring logging, monitoring, like all sorts of different stuff, like volumes and storage. And once I had those notes, now I figured let's put it in the video format and then just put it on YouTube so that maybe other people can benefit from it. So that's how it started.
I just sent a couple out today because I was having a conversation, and just for people who are not familiar with it, for context, you run the range of everything from deep dive 3-hour sessions on becoming an expert in I forget which one it was, in Kubernetes, obviously, but then you'll do a lot of higher level ones. The ones I just shared, I was having a conversation with one of my account executives yesterday, and he was confused between Docker and Kubernetes, thought they were the same thing, or containers and Kubernetes, and I was explaining to him. Came upon that, this morning on that specific video, and I was like, oh, here, perfect, take this one. And also, while you're at it, here's the difference between Docker and VMs, because I was trying to explain this hierarchy to him. So there's a lot of so many like great just primers of the fundamentals. Besides the deep dive, you got those fundamentals, which so many people, maybe you don't necessarily need to go dive down deep into these areas, but you need a fundamental understanding of that foundationally in order to do other things. So really appreciate what you've done. It's quite amazing.
Thank you.
And just coming back to the notes, I've been, and now Brian, this is the first time I mention it, I've been doing a lot of installations of Captain, our open source project, over the last couple of months. And it's always interesting to then, go on a Zoom session and trying to help people. And the first thing you see is their notepad or their Visual Studio Code with like all of their kubectl comment, and then all the notes. And I've also seen a lot of API tokens that I shouldn't probably see, but nothing is recorded. But it's as you said, right? We are learning. This is a new technology. We're all learning, and we're taking notes. And it's great that you have taken these notes and put it into an easy to digest, easy to understandable format. So I know you don't need more followers, but 1 or 2 doesn't hurt, I guess, more. So we will definitely put the links in. Now, today, because you have such a broad range of topics, today we want to focus on DevOps, because you also said DevOps is something that you live and breathe, and you've been doing a lot of work, especially around automation. I also, because you told me about this, you had a great interview with Brett Fisher on brettfisher.com. I think it was called, just reading out my notes, on DevOps roadmaps for humans. And there's some great discussion. That's why I don't want to kind of repeat what you have said there. So if people really want to get some basics, some behind the scenes from you and some initial discussions, I encourage people just watch this particular video. But still, for me, what would be interesting from you to get is, there's a lot of people that are, first of all, trying to figure out what DevOps really mean, because there's 1,000 different definitions. Shall we get into DevOps? What does it mean to become a DevOps engineer? Maybe I'm not suited for a DevOps engineer. I think knowing whether you want to pursue a DevOps career, I think that you can, if you can answer, well, I don't have the right skills up front, then maybe you are, preventing people from investing in something that doesn't make sense either. So my question to you is, what's initially your reaction when people ask you, what's the right way to get started with DevOps? Am I in the right field? What do I need to know? Or what is a good indicator maybe that tells me, maybe this is not the right thing for me and I should do something else?
Like very often when people ask me, they're usually in the IT field, or they're kind of looking at different job descriptions and kind of trying to figure out. The first thing I say is that you have to have some foundational knowledge, because I think just jumping into DevOps as the first field in your IT career is actually wrong, because you're just going to be overwhelmed, because DevOps is like having an overview of how the whole, like the complete software development deployment process works, right? So that's like too many things at once for an absolute beginner. So I always say either do the development first, or system administration, or like cloud engineering. So basically get some basics of those two. And another thing is that I think you have to be the type of person that likes DevOps, because my observation is that you need to love, and also you need to be able to think in like a little bit more abstract way, because DevOps is like you don't go deep into like, you don't specialize. Okay, now I'm like whatever Docker engineer, whatever. Like in DevOps, you have to know so many tools. Because there's so many categories, and there's so many pillars of this whole process, right? So I think you need a skill to be able to connect all those stuff on more higher level than like go deep into one technology. So if there are people who, they become language specialized, right? Programming language specialized, and there are people who like to be specialized in something. So for those type of people, I would not actually recommend DevOps, because then you would not have like it's going to be really difficult to specialize in one or two technologies in DevOps, because especially with the developments of and improvements in the deployment processes and development processes, there are new technologies and platforms coming up, right? So you actually have to be open and ready to learn new stuff all the time, right? And not only new technologies, like new concepts, right? We have this GitOps now, we have the DevSecOps now, the thousands of other concepts. And I think that this is going to continue emerging because there are really cool things coming up. There are people who are developing on top of Kubernetes, right? They're developing on top of these new developments because they see that developers and system administrators, DevOps engineers, they see that there's a real value in these improvements. So I think it takes a type of person, and also you need to have some kind of basics in IT.
Yeah. So I think, if I hear this right, it's a specialist versus a more generalist, right? Because in the end, this is what you need to have process thinking. You need to have obviously then still the people skills, because you need to understand what are the individual requirements of the people that you want to make happy in the end, which is allowing a developer to use your pipelines. Still, I guess though, right? Because, and this is also what I'm seeing in our organization and in other organizations, a key skill is to build all these integrations, to kind of glue all these tools together. This is a lot of piece. And I remember I was browsing through the questions that you got from the Brett Fisher show. And there was a lot of questions that come in. So, well, do I now need to learn Python, or is Bash better? Well, what do I need to do in order? Then, you have, I think, a couple of questions around the tooling and scripting languages. So do you agree that at least kind of one of the traits of a DevOps engineer definitely is scripting, because scripting is the fundamental thing to connect tools? This has to be there, right?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, you can operate. I think it is realistic that you do stuff and you configure DevOps pipelines and processes without scripting, but it's just going to be more work. It's going to be more work for you. You're going to make mistakes. Things are going to blow up, and people are going to be emailing you and chatting you. Like developers will be writing you, hey, the application isn't working. The sysadmins will be emailing you. So it just makes your tasks easier, right? And then things just more transparent also, so you don't have to do like the stuff for everybody. But if you write scripts, you kind of give them like developers or operations people, you give them the scripts and tools so that they can do stuff instead of you kind of running to each problem and fixing it yourself. So what I also think is feasible is, especially if you're a junior DevOps engineer, you can definitely start by doing everything manually on your own, and then you can kind of evolve from them and start, learn Bash scripting or Python, whatever, and then you start automating what you're already doing manually.
Yeah, I found that always, and I think, Brian, we talked about this years ago, the automation piece, right? Start with automating something that you do manually right now is a great way also for you to then learn a new language. I think we both had the challenge, or we talked about this, that every year pick a new scripting language, because it allows you to, first of all, keep your brain fresh, being up to date on new technology, what's out there. But in the end, really use that technology to automate something that you otherwise are spending too much manual time in. And yeah.
I would just add to that too, from what I'm gathering, there are two. You can come into DevOps from either as a developer who's really into the other side of things and maybe want to broaden, or if you're in operations but you like doing some coding and you want to expand. But I think when a lot of people hear scripting, there's a little bit of fear, right? Oh my gosh, now I'm going to have to be a developer. But what I've learned, so my background, and I'm sure people listening have heard this before, but for Yunnan as well, I was a communication major. I was studying television and film. I got into performance because I wanted more money than what I was making editing videos, right? So I was all self-taught. And so I don't have development background. I don't have heavy programming background. But when Andy brought up this idea of like, hey, actually, I think you got it from Wilson Marr, didn't you, Andy? It might have been something. There was a list of things for performance people. But the point is that scripting is not development and is not as complicated as development. It's very straightforward. It's very much you put in what you wanted to do. So don't let that be a hurdle, I guess is what the point I'm trying to make, is it's really not as complicated as development. Right? And it's a lot more fun because you just do things and suddenly, things start working. You're like, oh, that's awesome. I just made my life easier.
And you run the same script 100 times, trying to figure out why the first 99 times you get a compile error or like a runtime error because of a variable not set or some strange things. So it's a missing indent. Yeah, something like that, exactly. But this is now a question to you, Nana, because I want to see if you have the same observation, and maybe if we say DevOps engineers are, using scripts to automate things, gluing tools together. Yet most of them might not be trained software engineers, which is okay, right? Because we need a lot of people that can do automation. Aren't there two challenges? First of all, if every organization tries to build automation, kind of gluing similar tools together, aren't we running in a situation where, as a global community, we're building a lot of, let's say, similar glue code? And because we're trying to solve similar problems, because in the end, a delivery pipeline, what does it do? It does build, it does deploy, it does test, does evaluate, it does promote. So the first thing is, aren't we running into a situation potentially where we're all building and trying to solve the same problem, maybe just with different languages and with different skills? And the second thing is, if most of the DevOps engineers are not trained software engineers, don't we run into the problem that these scripts that they generate are not following good development best practices, and therefore you end up with very hard to maintain code, duplicated code, and just in the end slowing people down?
Yes, and that is absolutely the reality. For example, a lot of companies, since they've introduced Kubernetes, for example, in the company, they tried to, or they still try to build their own self-hosted Kubernetes clusters, right? Mm-hmm. And then and obviously this is a really complex task, right? Because you have to take all your Kubernetes clusters, right? You may have your own, on-premise stuff, and you may be using some other servers. So you have to take this complex technology, you have to make it even more complex, and then make it easy to use, like with the APIs and the developers, and you have to have an administrator team who is managing the security and stuff like this. And I know that there are a lot of big companies, a lot of medium companies that actually try to build this themselves. And of course, now you can imagine how much resources, how much training, because you have to, you really have to now start telling your employees that they have to learn the Kubernetes and how to build all this stuff. And obviously there are solutions out there that are trying to solve the same problem. So I personally believe, now this is a more complex example, but in terms of scripts or some more less complex use cases of just gluing 2 or 3 technologies together and building some processes, my approach would be, I would first try to find, is there a tool that is already doing something like this, which is maintained by a community, which is properly tested with whatever technologies that probably the developers know about, and then use that. Because exactly as you said, because even if you know the technology, right, then who is gonna keep maintaining this stuff? And usually, from my experience, this is usually one person in the team that's writes these scripts, and then he has all the knowledge and maybe documents just a little bit for the other people. If he's in a different project or if he leaves the company, nobody knows how to fix anything or how to change the code, right? So they kind of stuck with this legacy script, whatever.
Yeah. And I think you're just explaining the person of Christian Eckelmann, who we had on the show 2 episodes ago. He was the one who gave us an overview of things not to do when we started in Kubernetes, because in his company 2 years ago, he started with Kubernetes on bare metal, like similar what you were describing in your kind of gig that you did in Austria, and then running through all the challenges that he had, and it's fascinating. And then also, because I did another thing with him, he was showing his GitLab pipelines, and his GitLab pipelines, the code was like more than 1,000 lines long, because it's like combination of the process, like the tool integration here, another tool here, some bash scripts in there. And then he said, I'm constantly waiting, or I'm constantly reacting to Slack messages from his colleagues saying, pipeline broken, please fix, because nobody understands, why something breaks. And it's not, I don't want to say something bad about him, but it just ended up like that because he had to build these pipelines, he had to build the automation in, and he built it based on his best knowledge. But now it just becomes a maintenance nightmare.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I also know a case that's also in one of the big companies where probably a couple of years ago, I don't know, when they first installed Kubernetes, they used custom scripts to install the whole thing, and they obviously adjusted stuff, for upgrade, because at some point time came where they had to upgrade the whole cluster, so they adjusted the scripts. And a couple of years later, the people who actually 2 or 3 people who were involved in writing the script, they're in a different project, and this Kubernetes installation, upgrade, maintenance, whatever script is seen like a black box for all the DevOps engineers for the rest of the company. It's like, we don't touch that. Like it's very fragile, right? So nobody knows what's going on in the script. Plus, nobody dares to touch and adjust that stuff because they don't know what breaks, right? So, and this is actually a reality in a lot of cases.
Mm-hmm. I feel like because Kubernetes was also new to me about 1.5 years ago. And then with our open source project Captain, we obviously had to figure out a way, how can we install it with our users? But most of our users were also new to Kubernetes. So we then came up with scripts that were automatically installing either micro Kubernetes or k8s, so k8s. And then these scripts started to grow. I maintain one of these scripts that is now like 500 lines long, which is, setting up k8s in a particular version, instead of traffic using Nginx as an ingress controller, 5,000 if then else statements of what else you can kind of switch. I mean, it is exactly, as you said, it's becoming a technical nightmare to maintain this. Now, what's the solution then to this? Like, if people are now, we kind of give the impression that it's a cool world, but on the other side, it feels like we probably end up with a lot of challenges and technical debt. How can somebody that is really interested in DevOps make sure that they learn the right traits to not end up in a situation where, when they move from one project to the next, that they leave behind a big mess?
It's a very good question. Let's try to solve it. I mean, I think it still needs some time for like best practices overall to develop for DevOps space, because it's still relatively new. So we still need to gather some experience. Obviously, in some cases, technologies and tools have developed, right? So you don't have to write those custom scripts yourself. You can just go and use them. And that's the and I think that happens actually very logically, because and it needs some time, because after some time, when a lot of developers, a lot of teams have the same problem, at some point there is this open source tool or some kind of technology, or even a commercial tool that solves that problem, because then it's obvious that people can do that themselves. same with the Kubernetes installation, right? The managed Kubernetes service is, in my opinion, a really good solution for not having to maintain any scripts or not having to deal with Kubernetes installation, because that is a nightmare, right? So no Ansible playbooks for installing the Kubernetes binaries or no command line tools, right? So whenever people ask me whether they should use the managed service of Kubernetes or install themselves, I always say, please take that. It may cost from the beginning, it may cost a little bit more, especially if you're building a large cluster, but you also have to, exactly as you said, right? You have to understand that the people, like if it's a company that decides to build their own Kubernetes cluster, you have to have people who learn or who know Kubernetes enough to be able to write those scripts and to maintain and do the upgrades, etc. So distributing, delegating the stuff to the services that do it for you is one of the solutions. But in many newer technologies or newer setups, there are not such tools yet. So in that case, the alternative still remains that the DevOps engineers or the teams, they still write their own scripts or files, whatever. And in that case, I think the common approach should be that one person or two people shouldn't write those scripts, right? It should be actually like a team effort, and developers should be involved in them, because the script is usually doing something for the application, maybe doing something for the operation side. So I think the DevOps, one person, like one DevOps engineer, shouldn't be writing that script. It should be like from different areas, people are just coming together and writing that script, and also refactoring them as well as needed.
It's actually a good point, because earlier I mentioned, right, when I said, isn't there the threat that if scripters that don't have a proper, let's say, education in software engineering, not the expertise in these practices, that we end up with like large unmaintainable scripts. So I think what you just bring up is refactoring. Refactoring scripts is something that hopefully whoever's listening in and just started a DevOps role and you've been writing scripts for the last couple of months, think about refactoring, because refactoring means rethinking on how you've structured your code. Your code grows over time, but how can you make it simpler? How can you break it down into reusable components? Throw away things that you don't need anymore, right? Reducing technical debt. You are probably doing more scripting, or have done more scripting than I've done in the last couple of months and years. Are there any, from a refactoring perspective, is there great support now in tooling, like in the IDEs? I don't know, does a Visual Studio Code provide refactoring for Python scripts, for Bash scripts? I'm not even aware of it. Yeah. Do you know?
Yes. I actually wrote a lot of the scripts in one of the projects in Node.js because we had this micro frontends microservice application that were with Node.js. Plus, I found actually the right libraries for whatever I needed, and I used the IntelliJ has actually the like in the paid version you have this JavaScript support and you have everything there. But it's the same way Visual Studio Code is really good for like, especially if you add the plugins and extensions for any probably not for Java, but for Python, JavaScript is really good. So definitely, like the IDEs, they're really good for refactoring.
And then obviously you mentioned, version control. I think these are all practices that we all need to. But I know this should be nothing new for a DevOps engineer, but like these are all common practices. Doing pair programming, code reviews. These are all practices. Now the next thing would be test-driven development. How do you have an idea on how do you test your automation scripts? Are there testing frameworks for that or approaches?
I haven't used any in my projects, but I think it's because I know test-driven development from development part, right? Because I was a software developer before I became a DevOps engineer. So you have this trade-off, right? I think long-term, it always pays off. It's always a good idea to do a test-driven development because you don't have excuses anymore to not test your code, and you end up with a better code, obviously. However, this decision is often not made because of different reasons, right? Because it slows down the development process. Because when you start writing the features, it's maybe more exciting. Plus, from the business point of view, more features, and we don't have time for tests, right? There are a lot of cases like this. But I think long term, it always pays off to have tests for your application. Especially if you don't follow those best practices of, pair programming, code reviews, because the less you review your code, the more tests you need, right? Because the more risk that you're gonna make some mistakes.
Yeah, because if you have built an automation script that, let's say, does a canary deployment in a production cluster, and all of a sudden you make a typo and you've never tested it before, then have fun. Yeah. Hopefully you have some auto remediation in there.
Yeah, that's why I really like this new concept of GitOps, where I think it is really important, especially when we start creating more infrastructure as code, and when this infrastructure as code is also doing very important stuff, right? It's important to also treat them as just normal code, right? Yeah. So just like you would, or maybe even more carefully, because when you just add a feature, maybe one microservice is down, right? But if you have a script that configures, like you said, right, ingress controller or some more important stuff in the cluster, then you may actually ruin the whole thing, right? So the whole thing is down. So definitely unit testing, integration testing before you actually apply that to production cluster. And I think, or I hope, it's going to become the standard also very soon.
You have a really cool section on your TechWorld with Nana, the DevOps Bootcamp. And I actually thought, when I asked you earlier, what should people do when they want to get started with DevOps? I thought, the first thing is you go to my DevOps Bootcamp. You didn't self-promote, but I'm promoting this now. But I wanna ask you, not to give a full overview, but can you give a quick kind of a pitch on what do people learn in the DevOps Bootcamp, and why do you think it makes sense to go there? And also what do they learn? I mean, quick overview, if that's something, because a lot of people they want to become DevOps engineers, and the bootcamp sounds like an interesting idea.
Yes, and I think this was actually feedback from many people, that they were thankful that there is such a product, because I also saw that you don't have this step-by-step structured thing where you go through it and you learn all the stuff. So what we actually did was, what I did was I set up calls with my viewers, subscribers, people who are interested in DevOps, and actually ask them, so there are Udemy courses out there. There are my YouTube videos, right, that you watch, and you can learn Docker, Kubernetes fully. So what is still missing? What are your pain points, especially while you're trying to become DevOps engineer, right? And the most common thing that people were talking about was, so they learned Docker and Kubernetes on my website, on YouTube, right, from my videos. And they went to Udemy and they learned AWS there, and they learned Terraform, whatever. But these courses and videos, they're about one technology, right? So you learn Docker and Kubernetes, but what about the combination, right? So how to use Terraform with Kubernetes? How to use Jenkins to set up a CI/CD pipeline with Docker, Nexus, Kubernetes, the whole thing, right? And exactly as I said, as a DevOps engineer, you're not specialized in one tool. You have to be able to juggle with 10 different technologies, right? Mm-hmm. And that was the main thing missing, because that's actually the most difficult thing to find in documentations, because in Kubernetes documentation, you're not going to read a lot about how to integrate it into different CI/CD pipelines, right? Mm-hmm. So that was actually the main focus for us. to build like a structured guide. So you don't learn like tool by tool, but you learn like you go through like a path, so to say. So you start with now we are adding Linux because, as I said, you need some basics to start with in DevOps, and you learn Docker, you learn Jenkins, and then immediately you learn how to integrate Docker in Jenkins, right? And then you learn AWS, and then in Kubernetes, and then you have demos and projects how to use these 4 things together, right? And how all these kind of combines. So I think in terms of that, that's like something that was completely missing for people, and the most difficult thing. And I also think when you apply for a job and you start working as a DevOps engineer, like let's say a junior DevOps engineer, I think it's probably one of the jobs where you're mostly overwhelmed at the beginning, because the people are going to come to you, oh, there's a DevOps engineer. Let's give all the difficult tasks to this guy. So exactly. So another thing, and that was actually also from the feedback, was people just didn't feel confident in their abilities. Like they've been learning for 2-3 months, like 100 technologies, but they didn't know, like, am I ready for a DevOps task? Like, can I perform at a DevOps job? Like they were really stressed about that, especially as an entry-level DevOps engineer. So that's another thing that we kind of take away from them, because when you have built like a end-to-end fully like 10 technology combination processes, you know how things work, right? And in each category of DevOps, like the CI/CD pipeline, the infrastructure as code, like Kubernetes, like containers, container orchestration, cloud, like in each technology category, we have one tool. So, and that's also something that I believe in, is when you learn one technology, you are going to be able to learn similar technologies very easily, because
the concepts are similar. Yeah.
Exactly. If you understand the main concepts, like if you don't just focus on the technology, but also the underlying concepts, it's going to be super easy for you to learn new stuff. So, yeah.
Hey, I have one more topic that I want to throw up, but I'm also a little cautious of time. So before I throw out the topic, I want to ask you: is there anything else? Because I remember when we talked about doing this podcast, you mentioned, hey, it would be cool to pick up some of the questions from the Brad Fisher interview that you gave that you couldn't answer. Is there anything still in there that we haven't covered? Anything you want to throw out that you remember? Wow, I would have loved to have time. Or did we cover a lot of it?
I don't remember any of the questions, actually.
You don't have them memorized, the list in your head?
I didn't remember this one as well.
Like the names of all the people you're going to get your revenge on, like we all carry around with us?
Yeah.
I remember, like, mostly, like, topic-wise, they were all around, like, how do I get into DevOps? Like, where do I start, like, this entry level thing?
Yeah, and the other category, because I looked at because if you watch the thing on YouTube, you see the chat history, and a lot of the other set of questions was around, what's the tooling? Like everybody was asking, what is the right tooling? What is the right tooling? And this now brings me to rephrase that question to you. And I think you answered it earlier, but is deciding on the right tool the first thing you should do or not when you go into DevOps?
No, absolutely not.
Yeah.
And that was probably one of the reasons why Kubernetes became so popular, because it was kind of like the new hype. So everybody was like, that company is using Kubernetes, so let's use Kubernetes as well. And like with no idea what is it? Do we even need it? I mean, it's good. It turned out pretty well for Kubernetes and the whole DevOps world, but and that's actually a really good question, because I see a lot of people, like also the teams that I do consulting with, right? Should we use this and this and this? And I always try to, because first, before I tell them whether they should use the tool or not, I tell them, let's go through the processes. Let's see what is the existing process, right? What kind of application are you deploying? How are you deploying it? What are your offline processes, right? How is the whole delivery? How do your sprints are designed, and how do they work? And then based on the existing processes, we decide on the tooling, right? Because it's like it's the wrong part to start with, right? First of all, do we have a problem that tool solves? If not, then we don't need the tool.
Yeah. Cool. So now to my other question. Now we talked about DevOps a lot, and it seems in the discussions we had, we focused a lot around automation of delivery, pipelines, building, deploying, testing, promoting, and all that stuff. I've been kind of active. I wouldn't say active, but I've been trying to follow the DevOps movement over the last couple of years. I did a lot of presentations, but in the last year especially, I also talk a lot about SRE, site reliability engineering. And my definition, or at least where I try to explain, and this is one slide that I have, where I see DevOps and SREs kind of working in the end hand in hand, but coming from two directions. And I want to just get your feedback on, because this is a slide I'm using a lot, and I want to just maybe get it validated so that you can say this is complete bullshit, you need to change it, or maybe I have something there. But from my perspective, DevOps is using automation to speed up delivery. And they are measured on things like, deployment frequency, lead time to change, right? These are two of the DORA metrics, and there are more other metrics. But DevOps is really like using automation to speed up delivery and hopefully also increasing quality. On the other side, and this is where I see that the SRE movement coming in from operations, if you have constant more change coming in, then you want to somehow protect your SLOs, your SLAs in production. How do you do this if the guys over there are using automation? Well, you use automation in production to make your system more resilient, because you want to make sure that your change failure rate and your time to restore services and the other two big metrics on the DORA Institute stay in acceptable levels. So my question to you now, do you see this as well, that it's like kind of two teams, still kind of the from dev to ops automation, or from dev to ops teams, and then the other one from ops to dev, both using automation and in the end trying to deliver faster but still maintaining the stability of the systems? Is this how I get it right or not?
Like per definition, that's exactly right. Like that's the idea behind it. That like DevOps is coming from the developer side, and the other one is coming from the operation side, and they kind of have to work together. For me, it makes complete sense why there was a need for another kind of chain, like part in the chain. And the reason for that is because the DevOps engineer kind of emerged. First of all, DevOps engineer was not even an engineer, right? It was a culture originally that was supposed to be for bringing developers and operations together, so that the existing professions could collaborate. And that didn't happen because there was just too much space in between them. So there was like a dedicated profession, so to say, necessary for that. However, the DevOps engineer profession also just became too large, because when you think about it, sure, DevOps engineer has to know developer stuff, right? It has to know like really well how the Git workflows work in the team. How are the CI/CD pipeline design working? But on the other hand, the operations part as well, right? The configuring the like not administering the service, but like really configuring, preparing the server environment and stuff. In addition to those two parts, they had to now learn a lot of technologies that wasn't responsibility of either developers or operations, right? So, like at the end, it is just a lot, right? It is too much. So I personally see that it's very logical and makes complete sense to have another part there that kind of is more towards the operations, and another one more towards the developers, because then at least we can like draw clear lines between those responsibilities, and it's not one person who has to do like 80% of the stuff, and to also share responsibilities. I still think it's too early in terms of like how it's actually implemented, because I don't think there are many teams and many companies who have DevOps engineers as a team, not just one person, and have the developers, operations, and SREs. As I said, makes sense, but probably will need some time for us to see that in real projects.
Do you have any plans to talk about site reliability engineering in your TechWorld with Nana?
Probably, yes. Yeah. Because I mean, I like to like. I realize that a lot of my subscribers and people who are viewing, they're like, there are people who are interested in new stuff, right? Because when you come to learn, I don't know, Terraform and Kubernetes and stuff like this, like you are interested in new technologies. So I want to cover all the new concepts and kind of keep track of what's new and what's coming. Definitely, yeah.
To know, because I think the world needs content, especially in this new profession, and somebody like you that can really deliver complex topics in an easy to understandable way are people that will help our community to just adopt this faster and really understand what this is all about.
Yeah.
All right. Brian, did we forget anything, or did we?
I think we covered quite a lot there. It's funny. I was just thinking about YouTube today as I was watching some more of your videos, Nana, and I have a lot of several other channels that I subscribe to for, some like analog instrumentation or learning MIDI, which is a computer interface to keyboards and all this. And I was just thinking, like, where would we be without YouTube? I mean, there's a whole other side of YouTube, which I'm not even tapped into, the whole dark side of it, right? But from the educational point of view, what an amazing tool. And the content that people like you are putting out is just so amazingly helpful. So for you and everyone else that's doing all this great stuff, a real big thanks for me, because I'm learning all the time from them. So I'm sure tons of others are.
Thank you. Thanks. Well, I learned a lot of like when I started in programming, I learned a lot of stuff from YouTube. So yeah, same for me. Yeah.
It's replacing the call to your parents to say, how do I do this? Because you always used to ask them. Then I think, let me just look it up on YouTube. I don't feel like talking to my parents today.
Hey, and Nana, one last thing, because Brian and I keep talking about this. One of the cool things about running a podcast is you actually get to talk with somebody in a field that you would like to learn more about, right? And then you have this person there for an hour and you can actually ask questions. So it's great for our listeners that they learn about you and stuff that you do in DevOps. But I think it's also very selfish from us, because we also want to invite people that we want to learn from. Do you feel the same way about your YouTube channel, that you actually pick things that you actually want to learn and then get time, and fortunately it pays off? Yeah.
Yes, definitely. So most of the content is definitely like, oh, that sounds interesting. Let me try this out, and then But then that's what actually makes it fun as well, because it has to stay fun for you as well.
Yeah. All right, sir. Shall we wrap it up?
Sure thing.
Yeah. Typically I do a summary, but it's hard to summarize everything.
You haven't done a summary in a while. That's kind of fallen off.
I know.
So Andy was the summerator, the takeoff on the Terminator, because he's Austrian, right? So, but we haven't done that in a while. So I guess we'll just wrap up. So you mentioned, we mentioned, I think before the show started, some cons you were going to. Do you want any that you want to plug that are coming up, or any other thing that you want to plug that you have coming up soon?
The next one coming up is DockerCon. There is actually a German room, a dedicated German room for the German speakers, if they want to attend. And that's
awesome.
it.
All right, well, we'll put a lot of links to the stuff in the show notes. I want to thank you very much for being our guest today. Thanks again to all of our listeners for listening to us, and we hope to see you all next episode. Thanks a lot, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.